I slid the title report across the mahogany closing table and asked the title agent why the house my inheritance was buying already had another owner's name waiting behind my husband's. Dana Mercer did not answer me right away. She looked at the wire confirmation clipped to the escrow file, looked at the highlighted vesting page I had brought in my own cream folder, and then looked at Sebastian as if giving him one graceful chance to correct what I had just said. He did not take it. "Dana," he said, with that polished calm his family mistook for moral authority, "we don't need to read internal structuring language out of context." But Dana had already lowered her eyes to the line that mattered. "Vesting as proposed," she said, carefully enough that every word landed harder, "Sebastian Whitmore, and Renmere Residential LLC." For a second, nobody in the room moved. The seller's lawyer stopped flipping through his binder. Theodore Klein, who had represented the Whitmores for longer than I had known my husband, set down his pen without looking at me. And Evelyn Whitmore, who had spent 2 months calling the Greenwich house a welcome into the family, lost the smile she always wore when she expected a woman to be grateful before she was protected. My wire confirmation was still clipped to the front of the file. $3,200,000. My money. My grandmother's last act of faith in me. And somehow, in the room where I was supposed to sign for our future, the house already belonged to my husband and his mother's company. I asked a simple question, I said. "Why does the house my inheritance is paying for name your family LLC where my name should be?" Sebastian turned toward me at last. He was wearing the navy suit his mother favored for transactions she considered dynastic. In photographs, it made him look like the kind of man who carried old money as lightly as good posture. In that moment, it made him look like a man trying to keep a room under control after the wrong page had been read too soon. "Clara," he said quietly, "this is exactly why I wanted us to discuss structure privately before the close." Privately. That was the word men like Sebastian used when they meant obediently. 10 days earlier, I still thought they were only rushing me. I did not yet know that my inheritance had already been assigned a future that did not include me. My name is Clara Whitmore. For 7 years, I had been married to Sebastian Whitmore, heir to a family that believed every beautiful thing should look inevitable once they owned it. Their houses, their foundations, their charities, their marriages. The Whitmores were not loud people. They did not need to be. Their power worked best when it was dressed as taste. Before I married Sebastian, I worked in acquisitions for a boutique hospitality group that liked historic buildings and patient money. I was never the woman giving interviews or naming funds. I was the woman reading draft packets at 1 in the morning and noticing when a deed writer contradicted an indemnity clause 3 sections later. I knew enough about luxury property closings to understand something important. People only called ownership language a formality when they did not want the person paying attention to read it carefully. My grandmother Eleanor Mercer had taught me a similar lesson long before I learned it at work. She had been a school librarian with the kind of orderliness that made drawers feel like moral choices. Labels mattered. Dates mattered. Signatures mattered. If a person wants you to trust love instead of paper, she used to tell me, ask yourself which one they would choose if the money were theirs. When she died that winter, the grief came to me in pieces I could not schedule. Her teacup in the cabinet. Her handwriting on the birthday cards I had never thrown away. The silence of her empty condo after the memorial. She left me $3,200,000, and the number made me cry less because it was large than because it was proof she had spent the last years of her life planning a future in which I would be safe. I had never owned safety in that form before. I was 36, financially comfortable, professionally competent, and old enough to know the difference between being loved and being sheltered by someone else's confidence. But when the estate lawyer wired the distribution and the funds landed in my account, it felt like something steadier than luck. It felt like a room with a lock whose key belonged to me. Sebastian found me sitting at the breakfast banquet with the transfer confirmation in my hand. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said. "No," I said. "Just my grandmother keeping a promise." He kissed the top of my head and sat beside me, his phone still in his hand, one thumb flicking away some message from the family office. "I know how much she wanted you protected." Protected. Another Whitmore word I would later learn to distrust. At the time, I leaned into him. That is the part people always underestimate when they ask why women miss the first move. We do not miss it because we are foolish. We miss it because betrayal never introduces itself as betrayal. It arrives wearing intimacy. 2 days after the money cleared, Sebastian drove me to see the house in Greenwich. He had mentioned it before in the vague, wealthy way men discuss property they assume will wait for them. A Georgian estate on a tree-lined lane, 5 bedrooms, limestone terrace, slate roof, old library, pool house, enough privacy that reporters would not find it interesting. The kind of place his mother described as civilized rather than large. The day we toured it, the camellias near the front walk were just beginning to open. The house sat back from the road behind clipped hedges and iron gates that looked older than the country. Inside, the floors were dark, the windows tall, the plasterwork expensive without being vulgar. The library smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. I stood there looking at the shelves and thought, against my better judgment, that I could live in a room that quiet. Sebastian watched me absorb the house the way good salesmen watch a client touch the right fabric. "I knew you'd understand it," he said. "Understand it? That it isn't just a house." He smiled. "It's a place to stop living provisionally. There are certain lines women hear and translate into hope before we test them for motive. Stop living provisionally. Build something real. Have a home that isn't borrowed from the next quarter, the next lease, the next market." My work had taken me through beautiful spaces owned by people who treated permanence as a birthright. I had always known how much emotional force there was in being offered one. "I thought we weren't moving until summer," I said. "We weren't," he said. Then this came up. By this, he meant the chance to let my inheritance reduce the amount of Whitmore cash the transaction required. He did not say it that way, of course. He said things like, "Your grandmother would like knowing her money helped build your family home." He said, "There's no reason to let your inheritance sit in treasuries when it could anchor something tangible." He said, "This is how families create continuity." He never said, "My family likes the idea of your money more than the idea of your name." Evelyn came to dinner that Sunday carrying tulips and the kind of approval she dispensed in carefully measured portions. "The house is perfect for you," she told me as if discussing a coat she had found in my size. "It has dignity. And Sebastian has needed a proper family house for years." Proper family house. Not proper home for us. Not proper investment. Not even proper next step. Proper family house. I should have heard the grammar in it. Instead, I heard the praise. Or maybe I wanted to. My mother rented the same small condo for 23 years and called every mortgage statement other people's confidence. My childhood had been practical, warm, and financially careful. Nobody in my family had ever offered me a house with hedges and a library as if it were simply the next rational sentence in my life. Desire can make even intelligent women generous toward language that has not earned it. 2 mornings later, Theodore Klein emailed the first draft packet. He titled the message Preliminary Closing Materials, Meadowmere Purchase. I was at the dining table with a legal pad, a mug of coffee, and the reflexive concentration of every woman who has spent part of her life cleaning up after men who prefer broad concepts to exact documents. I opened the PDF, skimmed the settlement statement, checked the escrow figures, and felt the first pinch of unease before I reached the vesting line. The buyer line named Sebastian. Only Sebastian. Not me. No clarification. No joint tenancy. No marital trust language. No obvious placeholder note. Just Sebastian Whitmore. I reread the page, then the next one, then the source of funds schedule. My inheritance amount appeared in the escrow section. My name appeared in the wire origin notation. Yet the property itself did not. When Sebastian came downstairs from his office half an hour later, I was still sitting at the table with the packet open. "Why is my name missing from the buyer line?" I asked. He set his espresso cup down and leaned over the document with practiced ease. "Because the family office starts with a simplified vesting draft," he said. "It gets cleaned up before closing." Cleaned up into what? Into the final structure. I looked up at him. What final structure? He gave me the patient expression he used when explaining something he thought should be beneath friction. "Clara, Greenwich properties like this aren't usually held in a naive retail way. There are privacy layers. Liability layers. Sometimes entity layers. It's normal." Normal doesn't answer my question. He kissed my temple as if affection could soften imprecision. "We'll go over it with Theodore. Don't borrow worry from a draft." That sentence sat in my body all day like a stone. Do not borrow worry from a draft. Men who expect trust without transparency always try to make caution sound embarrassing. That evening, I called my friend Mara Ellison. Mara had once been in-house counsel for a family office so secretive it made the Whitmores look almost communal. Now she ran a discreet advisory practice for wealthy women who had discovered too late that family planning often meant planning around the family member with the least structural power. "Am I being paranoid?" I asked her, "or is there a meaningful difference between being the source of funds and being missing from vesting?" There was a pause on the line that told me she was already done humoring the possibility of paranoia. "Meaningful enough that I want you to stop using the word draft like it protects you," she said. "Did you ask for the title commitment?" "No. I saw the closing packet first. Then ask for the title commitment. And if they stall, order your own report." Sebastian says the structure is normal. Normal for whom? That was Mara's gift. She never let vague words stay unchallenged long enough to become furniture. "If your money is closing the deal and your name is absent from ownership," she said, "you are not being cautious. You are being awake." I asked Theodore the next morning for the title commitment, the vesting memorandum, and any entity documents connected to the buyer's side. He responded with a note so brief it felt pre-written. "All ownership details will be handled at final review. No need to burden yourself with interim versions." Burden yourself. I stared at the phrase for a long time. My money could fund the close. My questions could burden it. That afternoon, I ordered an independent title report through a title officer I had once worked with on a Nantucket acquisition. Dana Mercer had moved firms twice since then, but she still had the same habit of speaking exactly once more than she needed to. "Off the record?" she asked when I told her the property address. "Off the record until I know whether I need one." "That's usually how women end up calling me," she said. She did not ask for my reasons. Professional women learn to recognize danger in the specific tone a wife uses when she says she only wants to understand the documents. While I waited, the Whitmores increased the pressure in ways designed to look like momentum rather than coercion. Evelyn called to ask whether I had started thinking about curtains for the library. Sebastian forwarded contractor estimates with notes about summer landscaping. The family's interior designer emailed a mood board titled Clara's Reading Room. Every gesture assumed the house already existed around me, as if atmosphere could outrun ownership. At dinner the next night, Evelyn said the thing that should have ended my uncertainty even if the documents had not. We were at her house in Rye, eating Dover sole-off porcelain so thin it made me nervous. Theodore had joined us for dessert under the fiction that he happened to be nearby. No one brought up the closing at first. They spoke about a museum board election, a vineyard acquisition, a niece's engagement ring. Then Evelyn set down her fork and said, to no one in particular, the relief, really, is keeping the property in the line. I looked up. What line? She smiled as though explaining custom to a guest from another century. The Whitmore line, darling. One learns not to scatter anchor assets if one can help it. Sebastian laughed softly. Mother means major houses. I know what she means, I said. Evelyn reached for her wineglass. You mustn't hear insult where there is only continuity. There it was. The old money trick of turning exclusion into civilization. If my inheritance is funding the down payment, I said, continuity seems like a strange word for leaving me off the ownership line. The room changed temperature so subtly another person might have missed it. Theodore folded his napkin. Sebastian's expression flattened into the dangerous calm he used when he wanted me to feel socially reckless before I could feel substantively correct. Clara, he said, not at dinner. Evelyn gave a small shrug. This is why these matters are usually handled by counsel. Then counsel can explain why my money counts but my name doesn't. No one answered that question either. Instead, Theodore emailed me the next morning with a new attachment. Administrative contingency only, should title require technical spousal cleanup post-close. Routine. The attachment was a quitclaim affidavit. My breath stopped for a second when I opened it. The form acknowledged that any spousal interest I might claim in the property could be disclaimed after closing to confirm vesting as structured. Routine. It is extraordinary how often women are asked to sign away future arguments in documents labeled routine. I printed the affidavit and spread it beside the first draft packet on the table. Then I did what I always did when something in a transaction stopped feeling conceptual. I made a list. What I knew. My inheritance funds were entering escrow. My name was missing from the vesting line. A quitclaim affidavit existed before anyone had explained why it might be needed. Evelyn believed the house should remain in the Whitmore line. What I did not know, who, exactly, Renmere Residential LLC was. Whether Sebastian expected me to sign anything acknowledging I was not an owner. Whether the seller's side knew the real source of fund structure. Whether my money would remain separate if it crossed the closing table. By noon, Dana called. I have the report, she said. And? You were right to ask for it. She did not send it electronically at first. She wanted to speak to me before I saw the page in isolation. Current proposed vesting shows Sebastian Whitmore individually and Renmere Residential LLC as grantees, she said. The entity is Delaware formed, domesticated for Connecticut activity, manager managed. Who manages it? Evelyn Whitmore. I closed my eyes. Anything else? There is also a draft rider referencing non-borrower capital contribution from an outside marital source. The phrasing is vague, but it does not read like standard joint spouse participation. Standard joint spouse participation. Even Dana's cautious language landed like a slap. Can you send it? I asked. I can send the public-facing report. Anything beyond that has to come from counsel or escrow. But Clara? Yes? Do not wire another $1 until you know exactly where your name disappears. I thanked her, hung up, and stood in the kitchen with the phone in my hand so long the room blurred around the edges. The worst part was not surprise. The worst part was recognition. Somewhere beneath the marriage, beneath the dinners and travel and polished tenderness, Sebastian had always believed his family understood property more natively than I did. He admired my competence when it was useful to him. He did not believe it outranked inheritance. When he came home that evening, I had the title report laid out beside the quitclaim affidavit. He saw the papers and stopped in the doorway. Where did you get that? An independent title report. He walked toward the table, loosened his tie, and exhaled through his nose. Clara. No, I said. Let's skip the tone and do the answer. Why does the vesting name your mother's LLC? He remained standing instead of sitting, which told me he had no intention of being equal to the conversation. Because certain Whitmore assets are held through legacy entities. Then why is my inheritance in the escrow file? Because we're married. That is not an answer. His jaw tightened. It is the answer that matters. We are married. The house is for our life. Then put my name on it. He looked almost offended by the crudeness of the request, as though direct language itself were beneath the dignity of the family. It's not that simple. It is exactly that simple. Either I own what my money is buying, or I don't. You're reducing a family structure to a slogan. You're hiding a family structure behind one. For the first time since I had met him, Sebastian let the elegance drop fully from his voice. Do you have any idea how damaging this sounds? Ordering independent reports? Questioning counsel? Treating my mother like she's trying to steal from you? Trying? He braced his hands on the back of a chair and leaned toward me. Renmere is a protective layer. Liability, privacy, tax efficiency. You'd still live in the house. You'd still benefit from the house. Benefit. The vocabulary kept getting worse. I don't want to benefit from a house my inheritance buys for another woman to control. My mother is not another woman. She is if her company is on the title and I am not. He straightened and gave me a look I had only seen twice before, both times when someone on his staff had failed to understand what he considered obvious. Clara, families like mine do not improvise major holdings because one spouse is feeling insecure. There are moments in a marriage when a line divides everything before it from everything after. Not because it is the cruelest sentence said, but because it is the clearest. Feeling insecure. That was his translation of my refusal to finance my own exclusion. I picked up the quitclaim affidavit and held it up between us. Why did Theodore send this before anyone explained the vesting? Administrative contingency. Routine cleanup? Yes. Routine for whom? Women who ask questions after closing. He took the paper from my hand and set it back down with more force than necessary. You are turning this into theater. No, I said quietly. I'm turning it into reading. He slept in the guest room that night. In the morning, he sent me a text from downstairs even though I could hear him leaving. Let's not do this emotionally. We have a closing deadline. Emotionally. Another word men weaponize when facts begin embarrassing them. Mara came over that afternoon with a yellow legal pad and the kind of dry concentration I loved in women who had long ago stopped mistaking prestige for integrity. She read the title report, the quitclaim affidavit, the first draft packet, and the email from Theodore. Then she looked at me over the top of the stack. They're not trying to put you in the house, she said. They're trying to put your money in the structure. Hearing it, that plainly made something inside me go still. Can I stop this without losing the funds already in escrow? You need to understand exactly how the wire is described, whether the escrow instructions are conditioned on your approval, and whether seller counsel knows the beneficial ownership they're actually closing into. Also, I want every message you have from Sebastian and Evelyn about lineage, structure, or keeping things in the family. I laughed once, without humor. There are so many. We built a file. That is what competent women do when panic is useless. We convert feeling into sequence. I printed the escrow wire confirmation from my bank. I saved Sebastian's texts about continuity and smart structuring. I found the contractor email chain where Evelyn had written, once the property sits where it should, finishes can be chosen for Clara's comfort. Sits where it should. Not ours. Where it should. Then the deepest evidence came from a mistake no one in the Whitmore orbit imagined I would understand. Dana called me just before 5. I should not be the source of this, she said carefully, but someone on the buyer's side uploaded a revised operating agreement to the transaction folder with permissions broader than they intended. It's gone now. I saw enough before it disappeared. My throat tightened. Enough for what? Enough to tell you the agreement described outside capital as non-voting contribution. And your initials were nowhere on it. Did it mention the contribution source? Not by your name. By amount. $3.2 million. My amount. The money my grandmother left me had already been translated into a structure that gave me no vote, no deed, and no authority. I was not being asked to buy a home with my husband. I was being asked to subsidize Whitmore ownership in exchange for the feeling of inclusion. That evening Evelyn called me herself. Sebastian says you've been upsetting the process, she said without greeting. I've been reading. There is a difference. Only if the process depends on me not doing it. Her laugh was soft and terrible. Clara, no one is trying to harm you. But if you insist on treating every family protection mechanism as personal insult, you will create exactly the instability you claim to fear. I don't fear instability. I fear wiring my inheritance into a house your company owns. There was a brief silence. Then she said the sentence that destroyed whatever excuse remained. Once the house is inside Renmere, these distinctions become much less dramatic. Inside Renmere. Not inside the marriage. Not inside our future. Inside Renmere. Thank you, I said. For what? For finally speaking plainly. I ended the call before she could take it back. The next morning, Theodore sent a message requesting that all future closing questions be directed through Sebastian. Not me. Not the source of funds. Through my husband. Theodore also attached a revised settlement statement showing my wire contribution listed under an internal notation I had not seen before: marital external capital. Marital. External. Capital. 3 words arranged to make the woman disappear while the money remained. I forwarded the statement to Mara. 2 minutes later, she called. They're building the argument before the close. If the money goes through under this language, they will say you knowingly contributed separate funds into a family-controlled asset for marital use. Can they do that? Anyone can say anything if the paper helps. So what do I do? You stop the closing in the room where they need you quiet. That was the turning point. Until then, I had still been thinking like a wife trying to prevent misunderstanding. After that, I thought like a woman protecting an asset from conversion. The emotional shift mattered more than any single document. Sebastian's real power over me had never been money. It had been the assumption that I would keep prioritizing our private harmony over my own formal security. Once that assumption died, the rest became logistics. I requested the full escrow instruction set directly from my bank's wire desk, which provided the receiving account metadata Theodore had never volunteered. Dana confirmed the title order revision date. Mara drafted a concise written objection to any closing that failed to vest ownership consistent with the actual source of funds expectations communicated to me. I printed everything on cream paper and put it in a slim folder because women like me learn early that appearing composed is often treated as evidence that we are credible rather than difficult. Sebastian tried one last emotional approach the night before closing. He came into the library at home after 10, loosened tie, tired eyes, softer voice. The performance of intimacy. If you had photographed him, he would have looked like a husband exhausted by unnecessary conflict. We don't have to keep doing this, he said. Then stop asking me to pay for a structure that excludes me. You are not excluded. Then name me. He sat across from me and pressed his palms together. This isn't about punishment. It's about preserving major property correctly. You would still have every lived benefit of the house. Lived benefit. I repeated the phrase so he could hear how indecent it sounded. Clara, not everything has to be made adversarial. It became adversarial when you hid the ownership line. He looked away for a second, then back at me. If this close fails, my family loses the property. Your family should have thought about that before asking me to finance it without owning it. He flinched. Barely. But enough. You think my mother is the villain because she understands legacy. No. I think she is the villain because she understands legacy so well she expected me to mistake it for love. He stood up after that. If you force this scene tomorrow, he said, there will not be an easy way back. I looked at the folder in front of me, then at him. There already isn't. I barely slept. Not because I doubted the facts, but because truth does not erase the body cost of confrontation. At 4 a.m, I stood in the kitchen with my grandmother's wire confirmation in one hand and the title report in the other and let myself admit the real grief beneath the anger. I had not wanted to win against my husband. I had wanted not to need to. That is what women lose first in these stories. Not money. Not status. Not even trust. We lose the simple future in which the man we loved turns out not to require documentation before he behaves decently. By 9:30, I was in the closing room. Dark wood. Brass sconces. Water in square glasses. A tray of untouched pastries meant to make everyone feel civilized while signatures moved money across invisible lines. Sebastian stood when I entered, visibly relieved for half a second when he saw I had come at all. Then he noticed the cream folder in my hand and the relief disappeared. Evelyn was already seated. Theodore beside her. Cellar counsel across from them. Dana near the end of the table with the closing binder arranged in immaculate stacks. Clara, Dana said. Are we ready to begin? Not until I understand why my inheritance is funding a property that vests in Sebastian Whitmore and Mother'sLLC. The room froze exactly as it had in the memory I would later keep returning to. The difference was that now I knew precisely how to hold the silence. Sebastian spoke first. We discussed this. No, I said. You described it. You never answered it. I placed the title report beside the settlement statement and slid both toward Dana. Please read the vesting line and then compare it to the source of funds file. Sebastian's voice sharpened. Dana, that won't be necessary. Dana did not look at him. She looked at the documents, then at Theodore. Mr. Klein. Theodore cleared his throat. There are internal family considerations that have been misunderstood. Then let's understand them together, I said. Cellar counsel leaned back in his chair. He had the alert stillness of a man suddenly aware the transaction he thought was ordinary might become professional liability. Dana read the line out loud. Proposed grantees, Sebastian Whitmore and Mother'sLLC. Then she looked at the wire confirmation. Wire source, Clara Whitmore, personal account, amount $3,200,000. I opened the folder to the operating agreement summary Mara had reconstructed from the metadata and notes Dana could ethically confirm. And Renmir's capital structure describes outside contributions as non-voting, I said. So perhaps someone can explain why my inheritance is entering a house your family company controls while I am being asked to sign a quitclaim affidavit. Evelyn inhaled sharply. This is grotesque, she said. You're taking internal family prudence and turning it into a public accusation. There are 6 people in this room, I said. Public is not the issue. Ownership is. Sebastian turned toward me, controlled panic finally visible beneath the breathing. Clara, stop. I did not raise my voice. That was important. Men like Sebastian survive by waiting for women to sound unstable enough that the room stops listening to the paperwork. No, I said. You stop. Either I am an owner, or I am your family's capital source. It cannot be both depending on which line is read aloud. Cellar counsel spoke for the first time. I need clarity on beneficial ownership and source of funds expectations before my client proceeds. Theodore tried to intervene. This is a marital misunderstanding, not a transactional defect. Cellar counsel's expression did not change. If the source of funds believed she was taking title and the file shows otherwise, it is absolutely a transactional defect. That was the moment Sebastian lost the room. Not when I confronted him. Not when Evelyn went pale. When another man, neutral and professionally inconvenienced, translated my so-called emotion into risk the room could not ignore. Dana closed the binder gently. I am not proceeding to signatures until vesting and contribution expectations are reconciled in writing by all necessary parties. Evelyn stared at her as if no one had ever denied her timeline in polished syntax before. Do you know what this delay costs? She asked. Dana met her gaze. I know what an undisclosed ownership dispute costs. Sebastian's face had gone still in the way wealthy men become still when rage would be socially expensive. Clara, he said, we can resolve this privately. You had months to do that. I stood, gathered my folder, and took the quitclaim affidavit from Theodore's stack as I passed him. Keep the pastries, I said. I'm taking my inheritance. No one stopped me. The part that mattered most came afterward, not because it was dramatic, but because it was clean. Escrow did not release the funds. Seller counsel extended the deadline by 24 hours, then withdrew when the Whitmores could not produce a version of the structure that both preserved Renmere and made my role honest enough to survive scrutiny. The deal died 3 days later. The Whitmores lost the estate house and a 7-figure deposit arrangement they had assumed my money would stabilize. Evelyn sent one final message calling my behavior short-sighted. I never replied. Sebastian moved from persuasion to indignation to strategic coldness in less than a week. First came the flowers and the notes about misunderstanding. Then came the accusation that I had embarrassed him in front of professionals who mattered. Then came the proposal that we pause the house discussion and focus on repairing trust, by which he meant repairing my willingness to ignore what I had seen. I filed for separation before the month ended. Not because I believed legal action was inherently triumphant, but because the evidence had already answered the only question marriage could not survive. If I stayed, would he ever stop treating my rights as negotiable once they interfered with Whitmore comfort? The separation negotiations were almost boring after the closing room, which is how I knew I had truly crossed out of their control. Without the house, without my funds in the structure, without the emotional leverage of our future home, the Whitmores were left defending a plan that looked exactly as ugly as it was. Mara made sure my inheritance remained explicitly documented as separate property. Theodore tried 3 times to reframe the transaction as merely premature rather than deceptive. Each attempt died under the simple weight of the documents they had created. The quitclaim affidavit was especially useful. Men like Sebastian forget that the paperwork they prepare for after a woman signs is often the clearest proof of what they thought would happen once she did. I moved into a furnished apartment on the Upper East Side with terrible lamps and excellent locks. For the first week, I slept diagonally across the bed just because I could. I missed the version of myself who had once believed a quiet library inside a Greenwich house could mean arrival. I did not miss Sebastian. That distinction surprised me less than it should have. 3 months later, I bought a narrow brownstone in Brooklyn through a trust bearing only my name. It was smaller than the Whitmore estate, less symmetrical, and perfect. The staircase creaked. The back garden needed work. The kitchen would never be mistaken for old money. I loved it instantly because every page in the closing binder said exactly what it meant. On the day I got the keys, I stood alone in the empty living room and thought about my grandmother labeling jars in her pantry with neat black ink. Flour. Sugar. Rice. The love in that habit had never been decorative. It had always been a form of protection. That was what she left me, finally. Not just the money. The standard. Call things what they are. Do not let anyone flatter you out of precision. If the paper says you are a guest, believe it before the man says you're family. Sebastian called once after the separation terms were finalized. I almost did not answer, but curiosity still wears polite shoes sometimes. I hope you're happy, he said. It was not a blessing. I am clear, I said. That's better. He was quiet for a moment. You blew up a marriage over a structure you didn't understand. I looked around the room that was mine because every signed page agreed that it was. No, I said. I ended a marriage because I understood it exactly. After we hung up, I walked to the front window and looked out at the street. A delivery truck was double parked. Someone across the way was arguing about a ladder. Two teenage girls were eating ices on a stoop and laughing hard enough to lean into each other. Ordinary life. Uncurated life. Life that belonged to itself. I thought about the Greenwich estate for less and less time as the months passed. What stayed with me was not the loss of the house. It was the image of that title report on the mahogany table. The exact moment a room built on assumption had to rearrange itself around what was written. The way Evelyn's face changed when the LLC name was spoken aloud. The way Sebastian kept trying to make ownership sound like etiquette until etiquette failed him. Women are told all the time that love is bigger than paper. Sometimes that is true. But paper reveals what love is being asked to survive. Sebastian wanted my inheritance because he thought money could enter the Whitmore line more easily than I ever would. He was right about one thing: the house would have changed my life. Just not in the way he promised. It would have taught me, every morning, what it means to wake inside beauty you paid for and permission you never owned. Instead, I learned something better. I learned that control is not the loud moment at the end of the story. It is the quiet refusal in the middle. The page you read. The question you ask. The signature you withhold. The room you leave before they can rename your surrender as grace. By winter, I had books on my shelves, rosemary in the back garden, and a locksmith who knew me by name because I wanted every old cylinder in the house replaced on principle. Mara came over one Sunday with bagels and looked around the living room in that satisfying way women do when they know an outcome was earned. "How does it feel?" she asked. I thought about the answer before I gave it. Like I stopped auditioning for a family that wanted my money more than my voice. She lifted her coffee in salute. Good. The truth was, it felt even simpler than that. It felt like ownership. Not the performative kind. Not the kind men describe over dinner to make women sound difficult for asking about it. The real kind. The kind that survives when the room is empty and the papers are signed and no one richer than you is explaining why gratitude should take the place of rights. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear my grandmother's voice in the kitchen. If a person wants you to trust love instead of paper, ask yourself which one they would choose if the money were theirs. The Whitmores chose paper. So did I. That is why I kept my inheritance. That is why the house never closed. That is why the only name on my front door now is the one they thought would be easiest to move quietly out of the way. They wanted my inheritance to buy me a place in the family. I used the truth to buy my way out of it.